Buckle up, your roadmap to the latest in auto. Welcome to Highway Herald. Here we break down the shifts shaping the roads, industries, and alliances that define the cars we drive. The North American auto industry has long thrived on cross-border synergy, assembly lines, parts, and people moving seamlessly between Canada and the US. But that well-oiled machine is now grinding under pressure. With America's towering $37 trillion debt colliding with sweeping tariffs, integration is jamming, while Canada shifts into overdrive, rewriting the rules of the road. Fiscal meltdown meets tariff turbulence. The spark came from a fiscal milestone no one expected to arrive this quickly: America's national debt blasting through $37 trillion in mid-2025. The Congressional Budget Office once projected this figure wouldn't be reached until after 2030, but relentless borrowing during the pandemic, bipartisan tax cuts, and the 2025 Big Beautiful Bill pulled that deadline forward at breakneck speed. The U.S. is now piling on nearly $1 trillion every 5 months, burning fuel faster than the economy can replenish. In response, Washington swung with tariffs, its supposed counterpunch. On August 1st, the administration slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, reinforced penalties on third-country routing, and doubled down on Section 232 duties covering steel, aluminum, and autos. The reasons ranged from national security to fentanyl smuggling. The result? Higher prices across the board. From Canadian aluminum and car frames to basic grocery staples, costs have soared. Detroit automakers, already squeezed by labor disputes and pricey EV batteries, now face sticker increases of $1,200 to $2,500. Instead of pressuring Ottawa, Washington revealed its own fragility, leaving Canada an opening to surge ahead. And that's where Canada flipped the script, turning a tariff storm into an opportunity to show grit and rally its economy. Canada hits back with grit and global pivots. Conventional wisdom predicted Canada would buckle under America's tariff barrage. Instead, it shifted gears and revved its national engine. A sweeping Buy Canadian movement surged across provinces, slicing into U.S. market share and reshaping consumer habits. American liquor brands, once dominant in Toronto and Vancouver, saw sales collapse by more than 60%. Even cross-border travel flipped. More Americans are now heading north than Canadians going south, a symbolic reversal of decades-old patterns. Prime Minister Mark Carney, sworn in March 2025, declared the dependency era over. His One Canadian Economy Act tore at interprovincial trade barriers and poured billions into highways, rail, and digital infrastructure, welding Canada's provinces into a unified powerhouse. The results were immediate. U.S. share of Canadian exports dropped from 78% to 68% in a single year. Shipments to the UK multiplied fivefold, and trade with Europe, Japan, and Australia surged. Most importantly, Canada pivoted south to Mexico, forging the Maple Aztec Axis, a $2 trillion Canadian partnership enabling Canadian cars to bypass U.S. choke points and reach Europe and Asia directly. Before we delve deeper, don't forget to subscribe to Highway Herald. Your support fuels our passion to bring you sharp analysis on cars, trade, and the shifting roads ahead. Now, let's roll into autos, the sector where this realignment is hitting hardest. The auto sector's new roadmap. No industry illustrates the shock more clearly than autos. For decades, vehicles crisscrossed the Canada-US border during assembly, with engines and transmissions shuttling between Windsor and Detroit like clockwork. Tariffs didn't stop this flow, but they made it far more expensive. Automakers now face a choice: retool supply chains to satisfy USMCA's 75% North American content rule or pay steep, non-preferential tariffs. Roughly 65% of Canadian-assembled vehicles already qualify, but EVs relying on Asian battery parts are vulnerable. To adjust, companies like GM and Stellantis are moving battery production into Canada, supported by Ottawa's EV incentives and mineral reserves. The consequences are visible. Canadian-built SUVs cost $1,500 to $2,000 more in U.S. showrooms, while trucks sit idle as buyers hesitate. At home, Canadian consumers are buying local, fueling domestic demand. Meanwhile, trade routes are being redrawn. Cargo once bound for Detroit now flows through Halifax, Vancouver, Montreal, and south to Mexico. Far from collapsing, Canada's auto sector has adapted, gaining independence as Detroit struggles to keep pace. But autos are only part of the picture. Canada's real ace in the hole is energy, the quiet force powering its leverage. Energy, Canada's quiet power play. Oil remains Canada's hidden torque in the trade battle. The US relies more on Canadian crude than on any other source, with pipelines and refineries designed specifically for heavy Canadian oil. Cutting those flows isn't an option. It would send US gas prices soaring and trigger political chaos. That dependence gives Ottawa leverage tariffs they can't touch. Even as rhetoric hardened in 2025, Canadian crude kept flowing south, and revenues climbed as global oil prices rose. Rather than pocketing profits, Canada reinvested in pipeline expansions, LNG terminals, and renewable projects, securing long-term dominance. For automakers, energy ties directly to costs. Expensive oil drives up plastics, rubber, freight, and shifts consumer demand toward hybrids and EVs. Ironically, US drivers are financing Canada's rise each time they fill up. Canada is also binding energy to Mexico, with the Maple 8 pension funds investing billions in solar and wind projects. Every barrel reinforces Ottawa's quiet leverage, leaving Washington unable to risk confrontation. All of this is reshaping the bigger picture, the entire North American trade map itself. A rewired North American trade map. By 2025, North America's trade map looks completely rewired. Canada, once dismissed as the junior partner, is now steering. Its dependence on US exports dropped by 10 points in a single year, while fresh markets in London, Tokyo, and Jakarta opened wide. Goods once funneled through American routes are now reaching Europe and Asia directly. The US, meanwhile, is stalling. Alcohol exports to Canada collapsed by over 60%, auto parts orders thinned, and cross-border retailers cut forecasts. Tourism flows flipped. Canadian visits to the US plunged nearly 40% in July 2025, while more Americans traveled north, reflecting both rising costs and patriotic boycotts. Perhaps the clearest signal is investment. Tariff volatility has US firms relocating plants, labs, and R&D hubs to Canada, shifting capital northward. What began as resilience is now structural change. Canada is building a hub-and-spoke model, with Mexico, Europe, and Asia as spokes. Energy powers the engine, autos rewire the gearbox, and Washington is left reacting, not leading. Verdict: Canada takes the wheel? America's tariff offensive turned into Canada's proving ground. Instead of folding, Canada pushed back, launching a nationwide Buy Canadian movement, diversifying exports, and forging the Maple Aztec axis with Mexico. Ottawa is pouring billions into highways, ports, and EV supply chains while using energy dominance as quiet leverage. The US, meanwhile, is weighed down by $37 trillion in debt, a tariff strategy that backfired, and waning influence over its neighbors. Detroit automakers face higher costs, US consumers are paying more, and Washington's grip on North American trade is slipping. Canada isn't just enduring, it's steering confidently, with the trade center of gravity shifting north. The real question: will America adapt, or risk being sidelined in its own backyard? Now we'd love to hear from you. Do you think the US can rebound and reclaim trade dominance? Or has Canada truly shifted the balance for good? How do you see rising energy leverage affecting the auto market and consumer choices? Will this Maple Aztec axis with Mexico become the defining alliance of North American trade? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your take. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe to Highway Herald so you don't miss the next deep dive into the vehicles, industries, and policies reshaping our roads. Thanks for watching and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's more exciting and informative content waiting for you.